We have sailed more than 9,000 nautical miles to make it here to New Caledonia. There is only one remaining passage before we will have crossed the entire Pacific Ocean. The 800 nautical miles between New Caledonia and Australia can be a somewhat tricky passage to pick a weather window for. With the season changing, we picked the first decent opportunity and raised the anchor to head out to sea.
So the nearest pass we're going to go out of is right there. So we'll need to work our way like up to here. That's the range mark. Doesn't look like there's enough water, but there is on the other chart.
It's always a little hectic preparing to set out, dealing with customs officials and readying the boat. But once at sea, all that fades away, and we only have to think about keeping the boat moving well on course. The wind built in the afternoon, and we tucked in a reef to keep the boat under control.
Sheep that in a little bit and then pull some jib in.
Conditions really picked up at about 4 p.m. We passed by a squall that passed in front of us. It's been a bit of a rough ride.
Conditions were rougher on the second day. We stowed the mizzen completely and sailed with double-reefed main and a reduced jib.
to just a touch of jib, just to keep the head off a little bit, ease the weather helm. It's an ugly system to windward, bearing down on us, and it's got a lot of wind so far, and it might get worse. We'll heave to if we have to. Here comes the rain.
I think we're gonna earn every single one of these miles.
It's been a tough crossing.
The stiff breeze on the beam meant deep rolls and a wet ride. But it also meant fast sailing, and we soon left New Caledonia far behind. Periodically, waves would break on deck, filling the cockpit well. We stood our watches from the companionway, with the drop board in, but sometimes it was necessary to venture out to adjust the self-steering vane or the sails.
So for the last 3 days, we have had no ability to cook. Our propane gas solenoid failed, and it's on the foredeck with the propane tank. And the waves have been breaking across the deck so much that I just haven't been able to get up there and fix it. But luckily today, the waves are much smaller, and so I can finally go up to the foredeck, and I'm just gonna bypass the solenoid for now. See how rusty it is? This is a marine grade fitting. It's So this thing has obviously lived a very rough life out here exposed to the elements. Normally you'd want to put this in a vented propane locker, but we don't have a propane locker and we can't put this inside because propane's heavier than air. So if there's a leak in any of this mechanism, it would collect in the bilges and blow up. So it has to be outside basically. This has lasted for about 4 years, pretty heavy use. So it's not ideal, but I have the exact same part, a spare, which I carry for this exact reason. So we'll put the spare on when we get to Australia. Oh man, I really hope I have the correct fitting. I think I do. Alright, this isn't quite as safe without the solenoid, but sometimes you just need a hot meal. Sometimes you find fish in the weirdest places. This one's on top of the Dodger, up under the solar panel mounts. Oh man, and he's been there a while. Oh yeah, flying fish. Sometimes it just smells like fish and you can't figure out why. Line of squalls passing us. You can see one in the distance and then another closer. Behind us is a giant one, or a closer one at any rate.
So every day since we left New Caledonia, we've been looking at the temperature gauge, and it's been clocking down about a couple degrees every single day. And today, for the first time, all of our coconut oils have solidified. We've never seen that before. We are really looking forward to the cooler weather.
Sailing at night, a full moon makes a huge difference, but it seemed to be getting smaller as I watched. A shadow slowly crossed and then fully obscured the moon. A surprise lunar eclipse we had no idea was coming. Most of the passage has had winds of 20 to 30 knots and a confused 3-meter swell directly on the beam. These are not extreme conditions by any means, but it does make life down below something to be endured rather than enjoyed, and the bruises to our bodies and our nerves were starting to accumulate.
Cooking is definitely one of the harder things on passage.
It's wild to think that Brisbane and Seattle share the same ocean, even though they feel impossibly far apart. I kept looking astern, picturing all the places that lie in our wake, stretching all the way back home. Ahead, an entire new continent loomed, though it was still out of sight over the horizon. Nearing the Australian coastline, we entered the shipping lanes. Ships were everywhere, and twice we had to change course to avoid getting too close. This is also the vicinity of the famed East Australian current, which ran against the stiff breeze, and the waves became particularly large and steep.
How we doing out there, Whit?
Oh my gosh, we got hammered by a huge squall. We're almost out of it though.
It looks perfectly clear behind you.
I know.
But the other direction is like an orange smoke almost.
Oh
Super
gosh.
weird.
Yeah, this is one of the weirdest squalls we've hit. It's really bizarre. Typically we get hit with the big wind on the front of the squall, but this is the tail end of it, and it looks even worse to starboard, so why we're not in that.
I think that went over us, didn't it?
Jeez, I'll be happy to be there.
Probably if all these clouds would clear, we'd get our first sight of land.
I know. Anticipating it any minute once we get through.
A little more forward. Yeah. There you go. No, yeah, that might even be too much. We can try it though.
The squalls did not let up. Conditions would ease for a time, and we would shake out the reefs to try and build speed, only to get hammered again, the wind clocking farther forward all the time. Occasionally, waves crashed over the cabin, and we worried that the dinghy might be wrenched from its lashings. The constant sail changes really started to affect sleep when off watch, and we were bleary-eyed and exhausted as we made landfall in heavy traffic and driving rain in the early hours of the morning. Entering the channel behind Moreton Island, we turned up into the stiff breeze, bashing all day up the narrow ship channel. We entered the Brisbane River and found calm waters for the first time since leaving New Caledonia. Tying up at the dock to handle customs formalities, we were exhausted but so excited to have finally crossed the entire Pacific Ocean. After clearing in, we crashed hard, sleeping deep as the river sluiced silently under our keel.
So we are in Australia now, finally, which feels really good. That was a pretty brutal passage.
6 brutal, tough days.
6 days isn't very long, and that's one of our shorter crossings, but it was a tough one. I think it might have been our toughest one. You think?
I agree.
Yeah. The waves were rough and on the beam for almost the whole way. It wasn't stable. So especially the last 24 hours, it was every 15 minutes we had to change something. We had to come out into the cockpit and change the course on the wind vane. You were on the helm through the worst of the squalls, I think.
Yeah, the last day was definitely the hardest. We got hit with squall after squall after squall. It was like back-to-back gust systems that would just come out of nowhere. The sky could be clear or you could see dark clouds on the horizon, but there was no knowing whether it was going to bring wind or not, and everything was so variable that last day. Comparing this passage to our longer Pacific crossing, I equate the Pacific crossing to the endurance that's required in a marathon. It was mentally exhausting, and we just needed more endurance. But for this one, it was like we were in a boxing ring and constantly ducking punches from the weather and the waves and the systems. And
we didn't duck the punches. We took the punches.
We took them in the face.
Whitney was like literally bruised. Our bodies just felt annihilated. But, I don't know. It wasn't. I was feeling okay until the last 24 hours, and then I think psychologically, we were so close, and I just thought we were basically done. And on the chart, it looks like you're going to duck in behind this big barrier island, and everything's going to be calm. And yes, we had to turn up into the wind, but at least we wouldn't have the ocean swells. But it was a trick of scale because we tucked behind that barrier island and there's still 25 miles of fetch. So the waves were not small, they were quite big, and we had to motor directly into them in a narrow ship channel, which we couldn't really tack much. At least for the first part, we couldn't sail hardly at all because it was so narrow. We just motored into these 4 to 6 foot wind waves, making 2 knots for hours.
We had been doing 6-hour night shifts and then trading off 3-hour shifts through the day. And that last day, because we got so beat up, we had to change back to 3 hours on, 3 hours off because we were so exhausted and we couldn't stay awake at the helm.
And there were ships everywhere. Fishing boats trawling and big ships and cruise ships, just so much traffic. But we are so happy to be here now. Australia is amazing. We didn't know what to expect. We were terrified of the border inspections that we had to get as a wooden boat. The wooden boats are classified as extra risky here in Australia because of the possibility of termites, I guess. So we were scared about that. We heard that we might have to empty the whole boat out onto the dock. And in the end, it was completely fine. They looked in every compartment, but we didn't have to empty anything. They didn't ding us. We had to pay $400 Australian, which is average. So we paid the average fee. So it went completely fine. They were very friendly. And Australia has been wonderful so far. We went to a proper brewery. I don't know, things that we didn't know we were missing, but then all of a sudden we see them and it just looks like home basically. And it felt like we were coming home. You know, everything is familiar. The wharfs are familiar, the way the docks are set up, the way the industrial district and the river is set up. It just felt like we were motoring up the Columbia River or the Duwamish River in Seattle.
We took on so much salt water down in the companionway and on us going down from our ships that everything was so salty and crusty and wet by the time we finished this crossing. So when we arrived, I took everything out of the boat and washed the settee covers, our sheets, everything. And it was a day of cleaning the salt off of everything. So the boat's happy now. I'm happy. We're happy to have sleep.
Yeah. Oh.
Had beer.
Beer.
Beer and cider.
Sleep. Some junk food. What do they call it? They called it farm to table comfort food, which is exactly what we wanted.
And now we are going to go explore the city.